feature presentation.
Welcome to the 300th episode of Untitled Movie Reviews. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Matt, are you ready to talk about evil?
Yes, today on our 300th episode, we are reviewing Johannes Roberts' Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City. Eric, I just thought of, again, the Resident Evil franchise reboot, which will be premiering today, I guess, or maybe we'll post this the day before, we'll see, on Thanksgiving Day, November the 22nd. Completely rebooting, new characters, new cast, has nothing to do with the Paul W.S. Anderson movies.
Even though he is an executive producer on this, but that's probably just in name only.
Yeah, but still shot in Toronto.
Yes.
We
Well,
gotta get that out of the
specifically
way.
Sudbury and Hamilton.
Oh, sorry. So the GTA in Sudbury.
Yeah. And what better ghost town wasteland than Sudbury and Hamilton?
It works, baby. And I'll start by saying, like, a little bit more of an authentic kind of retelling of the actual plots from the video games, because I think one of the things about the W.S. Anderson Resident Evil movies, which I think are pretty bad, were in that era of video game movies. I guess it's probably the most successful video game franchise, at least in film form, but maybe not critically. But obviously there was seven of them or something, wasn't
Yeah.
there? Like 6 or 7. I played the Resident Evil games as a kid. I've played some of the newer ones, some of the remakes, now as an adult. I wouldn't say I'm like a huge Resident Evil fan. Like,
You're not
people,
a res head.
no, I'm not. But the res heads do really, really love this franchise. But it is one of those kind of ridiculous kind of zombie monster franchises that I've had a blast playing throughout my life. But those W.S. Anderson movies, I felt like they took elements from all of the games. Like, they obviously had Umbrella and they had some of the monster designs, but the mansion plays a little bit of a part. But like, they
And
kind
the
of go,
train as well, right?
yeah, they kind of go off, off the
The
book, or
rails.
off the rails for sure, but off the game completely throughout that franchise, even if they include certain things. So I think what intrigued me about this one wasn't that it necessarily looked, like the quality was, that much higher than the W.S. Anderson movies, but it did look like they actually wanted to tell the story from the games. Like, from the trailer, it's like, oh, you're getting a bit of the Spencer Mansion, oh, you're getting the police station, like, and we'll get into it. But I think that this movie
And these are the first two games, right?
yeah,
Like in combination.
yeah, I mean, to get right into it, the movie kicks off with the Umbrella Corporation kind of take on the way out of Raccoon City. Basically, they performed experiments and basically ran this town for the longest time. But everyone's kind of taking up their work and leaving if you worked for the Umbrella Corporation. And, the town starts getting infected. And as the people are leaving, they find out that the city is going to be bombed at 6 a.m. So you have a cast that has people straight from the game. So like Claire and Chris Redfield, you have Jill Valentine, you have Leon Kennedy, and basically it's a retelling of the first 2 Resident Evil games, basically, in this movie. Not necessarily one for one, but pretty close to what those first 2 games are. Eric, I know you said you played a little bit of Resident Evil when you were younger, didn't you? Or was that a different game?
No,
None at all.
I mean, I had because it was a Capcom game
PlayStation.
for
Yeah.
PlayStation. I had
Mhm.
PS2, but I never really played Resident Evil.
Oh, okay. My bad.
I was more of an N64 guy growing up, like, at that age, cuz like it was PlayStation, the first PlayStation, right?
Yeah, the first
Yeah.
PlayStation. Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
no, but I love horror movies, and I've seen a number of Johannes Roberts movies now, and it's interesting thinking kind of how perfect he is for this, because you look at 47 meters down and 47 meters unhinged and strangers pray at night, and all of those movies, what they have in common, and this as well, is that they're all single locations. This, with the exception, it's almost like he takes a step up. It's like, I'm in the big leagues now
Two
because I get two
locations.
locations for the price of one. And that also kind of hurts it because it's like you're just cutting back and forth between two static locations as it's an under siege kind of movie. But it's also kind of funny that it's just literally these two locations where, characters are walking around rooms and, basically padding out the runtime. And that's also a very classic horror trope where, characters will be, you know walking around a dark room waiting for something to jump out at them. And then the other thing that Johannes Roberts, I think, is starting to become known for is his music choices.
Yeah,
Whoever he's working with in the music department for
always has a
curating the
blast. Yeah.
soundtrack is using a lot of pop tunes from the era of which, like, the late 80s into the 90s.
Well, I
So
should have
it's
said this takes place in '96, which is like
98,
what? Or
98.
sorry, '98. Yeah.
Yes, what a year that was. So with Strangers Pray at Night, the whole soundtrack is 80s based, and there's a great, and I've talked about this I think on the regular show at one point. There's a great scene in that movie, which is not a good film, but the scene itself actually is a standout, where you have Lewis Pullman basically encountering one of the strangers at a pool that's kind of abandoned, and Total Eclipse of the Heart is playing, and every time the stranger and him are fighting in this pool and he's being dragged down, the song is basically sort of
Like diegetic sound, isn't it? Like
yeah,
a
and
yeah.
it's a really well done piece of direction in terms of, like, the style and the look, but it also works really well. And then, like, in 47 meters unhinged, there's a scene where you have a diver welding something in this kind of submerged Mayan temple, and he's listening to music, and the song is Roxette's The Look. And, like, you just, he seems to have this thing with certain music cues of, like, pop hits from the 80s to the 90s, and here is no exception, especially with Jennifer Page's Crush, which is
Yeah,
just so
it's great.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I think those moments integrated in this movie work the best. I just wish that there were more of that, where, like, even though, to your point, what you're saying, it's more faithful to the first two games and to the essence of what Resident Evil is as a whole. I was kind of hoping for more of those weird flourishes throughout to
Hmm.
kind of
Hmm.
really add to it. And I do think the opening sequence too is actually really quite effective and creepy. It's just a lot of it is very,
Takes place in an orphanage, and it's kind of
yeah.
like yeah.
Yeah, Neal McDonough and is kind of like the main villain of the piece, and a lot of people will probably recognize him from Saving Private Ryan and Ravenous and things like that. He was also in the first Captain America movie. And then Donal Logue is the police captain, and those guys are really fun because they are just hamming it up.
You dropped out there for a sec, Eric, but
Oh,
I
I
think
was just I was just gonna say that both of those guys, these veteran character actors, Neal McDonough and Donal Logue, are just hamming it up and having a lot of fun in their parts.
yeah, no, absolutely, and I think they are the most fun in the movie. Yeah, I actually had a lot of fun with this. I don't think by any means it is a great movie. It is borderline. No, it's not even a good movie. It's a not so good movie. I don't want to go as far as saying it's a bad movie. That I had a lot of fun with being a fan of the games, and recently playing, Resident Evil 7, wanting to play Resident Evil 8. I haven't gotten around to it. And just loving that kind of blend of single location with ridiculous, very video gamey puzzle solving that makes
Pull out your
no,
Palm Pilots.
yeah, which is so silly in a real world sense, but in a video game it makes total sense, where you're in a old house or a mansion or a police station, but you have to find different keys and solve different puzzles and put things together to get a key and bring it to one place. And I'd never thought I'd see an accurate depiction of that, in a Resident Evil movie, because like the plot itself, zombies, kind of boring. It's, Resident Evil is a Japanese franchise. It gets a little ridiculous and silly and over the top, which is kind of fun in that way. But I thought that wouldn't translate very well to film, and I think that's kind of why, the original franchise went a different route and ended up to me being kind of bland and just straight up bad. So then going into this and saying like, oh shit, they're really going to do an accurate retelling of those first two games. And you see the police station and it looks like this ridiculous museum like it is in the game, or you see the Spencer Mansion and it looks exactly like it is in the game. And that stuff's very easy to do. You just go one for one. Let's try to make it look like what it is. But then you kind of have, the actual in the movie, what's her name's character was never even from the games, right? Like,
Alice. No,
Alice was
yeah, yeah,
never,
Alice.
yeah.
Mila Jovovich's
They
character.
might
No,
Mila Jovovich, thank you.
yeah.
I blanked for a second. um, she was never actually in the game. She might have been introduced later because of the movies, but again, I'm not a diehard Resident Evil
Well,
guy. I've just kind of played the
in the
games.
Paul W.S. Anderson franchise, the Claire Redfield character is introduced in the third movie, played by
Yeah,
Ali Larder, which is the one
right,
directed by Russell McCauley, and
right.
so
They
like
do
Jill,
introduce a
Jill
lot of the
Valentine's in part two. So
Yeah, Valentine. I think they introduced Chris Redfield as well, right? Like I think they introduce a lot of the characters from Albert Wesker is obviously, if you've seen that original franchise, like it gets really ridiculous
he
with him
loves
as well. He
sunglasses.
does really love sunglasses and there's yeah, we'll save that. But I don't know. I was just like being a fan of the games and only being like a mild fan of the games. I found myself really engaged throughout the whole movie going, oh shit, that's really cool that they did that. Or that's really clever how they incorporated some of the puzzle thing or the mini map that you would have in a video game. Eric mentioned a Palm Pilot and like um Albert Wesker has this Palm Pilot and he's getting these secret messages and he has to look at this Palm Pilot and it has the map of the Spencer Mansion on the Palm Pilot, just like if you were looking at the map in the video game. And that is to me was a really clever way of putting some of those video gamey elements as like a nod. And I mean something like Battleship did that in an even more ridiculous way with it being a board game and they're actually at war going B-52 or whatever. But in this, I thought those little things and only the little nod to the puzzle solving and secret doors and stuff. I'm like, oh shit, that is really, really cool. And I think taking those first two games and using that as the kind of building blocks to the movies makes for an engaging and sort of fun movie. Like I found myself laughing either at how bad it was or laughing at some of the music choices being really inspired or funny. I think when it comes to the CG and the like the overall look of the movie, it obviously looks still kind of cheap. It almost does have that Canadian production kind of look
Matt,
to
it
it.
looks because I rewatched the first
Yeah,
Resident Evil this year. It looks
but
exactly the same from the
yeah,
first Resident Evil
yeah,
movie, which was
yeah.
in the early 2000s.
Yes, and that's what I mean. Where like, and I'm kind of fine because it takes place in '98 and stuff like that. Like, I can get away with certain things, but it doesn't like it looks pretty cheap, especially when it comes to the CG and the monsters. Like the designs are cool because they are straight from the games. The zombie, there's certain shots, the classic one on the cover of Resident Evil with the white kind of faced zombie looking back at the camera. Like they incorporate those very obvious nods to the franchise. But all that kind of stuff cheaply and kind of works. And like, so I found myself going, yeah, this movie's bad, but I'm sort of having fun with it because I like the video games enough. And I think if you're like a diehard hardcore Resident Evil fan, I think you're going to eat this shit up and really enjoy it for what it is. And you're not really going to care because I think this is like the best version of a Resident Evil movie you possibly could kind of get or you need. Like I don't think the Resident Evil movies need a higher budget. I don't necessarily think the quality needs to be much higher than this. I think it could, but you might as well just go make an original zombie story if you really want something of that. Like I feel like this is authentically Resident Evil because the Resident Evil games are silly. They are kind of dumb. Um like at least when it comes to the story. When it comes to what makes the Resident Evil games scary or things like that, this is a problem I think a lot of video game movies have where you play these video games. So a lot of the tension, a lot of the excitement, a lot of, is the attachment to the characters even is because you are controlling these characters. And, when you have to kind of walk through the mansion in a quiet way and a zombie pops out, that's a little bit more scary when I think you're in control or you're just playing it on a TV and you're uber focused. When you have that in a movie like this, it ends up becoming a little bit dull because I feel like zombies are just a little bit dull and nothing is necessarily scary. And when it comes to the makeup and the CG, like I already mentioned, it's not super great. So even though you have those two panes of action of the police station and the Spencer mansion, the movie escalates and you get crazier and crazier Resident Evil monsters. But I feel like there's nothing super exciting when it comes to either the action or the scares or anything like that. I think the other thing fans will think is very interesting is the depiction of Leon Kennedy in the movie, because like I feel like um, he's kind of portrayed as a moron, and
He's
he's not,
useless.
and he's not that in the games. So I feel like fans of that character um might not love what they did with him in these in this movie specifically.
But I
But I
like that though. I think that that's
same,
interesting
yeah.
in terms of the juxtaposition of Claire, who's kind of the main character of this story, where when she returns to Raccoon City, she's been basically fending for herself ever since she was a child, and we learn of why she left and why she ran away from the orphanage and things like that. And I think that that kind of works, where like you see her very capable in basically an apocalyptic situation, in this microcosm, in this small abandoned ghost town, basically. But yeah, like I again, I don't know Leon Kennedy that well, but like seeing him in this movie, like it's kind of also playing against the trope of like, the rookie cop who's kind of quiet and unassuming, who's usually the guy that saves everybody in horror movies, but this time around he's just kind of, you know, dead weight in a lot of
Yeah.
ways.
And I like that because I mean, in the second game, I'm pretty sure it's you choose who you want to play as, either Claire or Leon, and it's the same kind of game, and you play as one and then play as the other, and it just depending on who you selected first and who you played first, um, it's a little bit different. Um, but yeah, I mean, I like that, and I think even the juxtaposition between the members of like the stars team, right? Because like they're all kind of like, you know, special forces kind of dudes. And I think having his kind of bumbling rookie cop thing, I think works because you have him over there with Claire, and then you have the stars team over at the mansion, right? And then so I kind of like that um as well, but I just feel like people who maybe love that character, I don't think he's portrayed as much of a moron in the games as he is here. But that could even be building, and like I do hope that they do more of these, because like I feel like they are cheap. And
Cheap and cheerful.
um if again, sort of, I had fun with it, where I really do think that you can build that character up, and you start him off as a bumbling rookie kind of idiot, and you don't want him to be kind of too OP or overpowered right away, and then you kind of can build that character up, because I think Leon ends up being like a pretty like a lead in, is it Resident Evil 4? I think people really love, and he's the lead in that, unless that's Chris again. Again, people who are huge Resident Evil fans, you'll have even more than I have like watching this movie. But yeah, I kind of had fun with it, man. Like I think the music choices were fun. There were many times where I kind of just laughed at, you know, just how bad it was. And I remember like looking over to you, or saying something to you under my breath as we were watching. And it's those moments that I was just like, you know what? Like I can buy into that for this kind of movie. Like I
It's
don't.
more campy than House of Gucci.
Yeah, which we just reviewed, which you guys can check out. And I think that level of camp and ridiculousness is sort of part of the Resident Evil franchise, and I think that kind of works. And it seems like Johannes Roberts either, was a huge fan of the games, or at least knew exactly what he kind of was making with this. And I don't think it kind of strives to be anything more than that. And I'm kind of appreciate it for that. Like, and we thought Ghostbusters as well, right? Like we went back and forth on that, and like how many nods you put in and nostalgia baiting, and just like, uh, you know, I think this movie has a lot of that as well. But because it's just adapting something, are those nods, or is it just adapting the story from the first game, right? Like you put in a
Right.
lot of stuff that's just in that first game. It's not necessarily nods. So I think it's playing on your nostalgia of those first couple games a bit, but those games did get remade recently, and then people really love those remakes. And I think this kind of, again, not a great movie, but I did have fun with it, and I like the two locations. I don't necessarily think it's scary or all that exciting, but I like how faithful it was to those first two stories.
So you found it more tasty than itchy overall.
One of the
Where
moments I laughed at.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are many times that you can laugh at this movie where, like, you're laughing at it, but maybe not in a mean spirited way, but you're just kind of like, okay, this movie knows what it is. It's very
Yes.
goofy and over the top, and like even Neal McDonough's character, like, there are moments where like there's a couple split diopters that are kind of fun, but like, his character always being like, they're after my life's work, they're gonna ruin me, and then like he takes his family down to this bunker in one
Just
scene. It's so
it's like why
ridiculous,
his family would be there is
and the
one
shirt
thing.
he's wearing is also hilarious, and like just thinking about like if you squint while watching him, he looks like Kelsey Grammer at times, which I also think is quite funny. um I also did appreciate the framing device and narrative structure being basically a real-time countdown clock,
Yeah.
that kind of like is basically counting down to 6 a.m. specifically. And that also reminded me a little bit of Return of the Living Dead, where like that also kind of plays in like this real-time kind of scenario of the military intervening at the end of that movie. But I think what kind of does it in for me a little bit is the faithfulness to it. Like, I appreciate that this is more faithful than the Paul W.S. Anderson movie, and this movie is kind of being respectful to the material and the genre, but I think because it plays within it so, like, it colors within the lines so much that it that when it does kind of go out of it with Roberts's kind of sort of signature style or trademarks as a vulgar auteur, um it's like you want more of that. You want
Right.
more of the weirdness and the fun, and when it happens, you savor it and enjoy it for as long as you can. Like even this close-up shot of like a half-eaten hamburger, like those moments are the most entertaining.
The
But I think
hamburger is straight from the game, I think, though.
yeah, but I think some of the genre stuff specifically is what kind of bogs it down. And specifically, you mentioned already, zombies are kind of the
Yeah.
least interesting movie monster. You can tell also that some of it is very much on a budget, where like you're looking at like a close up of this police station gate being kind of hoarded at, and it's all in close up in the way that like James Cameron shot a lot of his stuff in Aliens, where like you think that there are more zombies than there actually are,
Sure.
where in Aliens he only had 5 guys in alien suits, so like he kind of had to shoot to make it look like it was more than what it was. So I find like some of that becomes a little bit tedious after a while, and it's just going through these motions of, okay, like we're watching a person, with a flashlight walking around in the dark, waiting for something to jump out, or, some creepy music to play, or cut back to the police station, or cut back to the Spencer mansion. It just, it's,
And that
it,
might work in a video game, but doesn't
yeah, the
necessarily, yeah.
repetition of it doesn't work, and it feels like you're just watching, what do you call them again in video game
Cut
term?
scenes, yeah.
Cutscenes. Like it feels like
Yeah.
you're watching
And
cutscenes.
missing the gameplay, right?
Yeah.
Where the gameplay and the story of Resident Evil, yeah, it gets more and more convoluted. It gets a little bit more silly. Like it even starts that way. Like I like the Umbrella Corporation and this, this evil corporation that's kind of ruined this small town. But then the small town can have a helicopter and a special forces team because like it's just like it's so stupid. But then like
But
those are
it's
the
funded by
elements like.
Umbrella, right?
Yes, exactly. And so it does make sense in the world that they've created, even if it's really silly. And like, and I totally agree with you where it does seem like you're watching the cutscenes straight from a video game, but missing those gameplay elements, right? Because it almost like it skips to the end of the gameplay where the person's already dealt with, whatever puzzle or whatever zombie they've had to kill and things like that. And that tension from the game of you playing it or having to solve the puzzle or find the key as Nemesis is chasing you or a zombie's walking slowly and they get more and more coming after you. Like that's just kind of lost in translation, I think, when it comes to the movie. And I feel like a lot of video game movies have that problem, right? Because usually why you love a video game is because it has great gameplay. Like people didn't go to video games for great stories, and I think until fairly recently. Like storytelling in video games has gotten a lot better in the last 10 years or so. I think Resident Evil, it worked because it was a horror game. It worked because it was this weird horror puzzle game. Like those are the best elements I love from Resident Evil. And like playing Resident Evil 7 recently, like I'm way late to the game on a lot of these things. And I have Resident Evil 2 remake and I have Resident Evil 3 remake that I want to go back um and play. Like it's those elements that I really, really love. The story of Resident Evil, again, like I'm a fan of the games, but I'm like, I didn't retain much of that other than Umbrella is evil and there are monsters and they turned a bunch of people into monsters. Like, and I know the characters, right? But I don't know the minutia. And there are some people who probably with like a lot of video game franchises are like hardcore into the lore and hardcore into the story and the characters. And I think they'll be both excited about this and then obviously with some of the changes, some people can get a little testy with that. But I totally agree with you that I think while I still ultimately enjoyed it, I feel like it could have gone even further with some of those, trashy or fun elements. And then when it comes to, like you said, flipping back and forth and it's just people walking, with a gun and a flashlight through a hallway, it's like that might work in a game, but it doesn't necessarily work completely in a movie. I'm excited to see weirdly like where they go after this and if they do. Like I feel like it'll be probably pretty profitable. I think it only cost $25 million, which is,
Which went all to the music
like
cues, like all the
yeah.
music licensing.
Yeah, because I think you could jump right into Resident Evil 3 uh Nemesis and introduce Nemesis, which I think
Now, is Nemesis, wasn't he a person before? Or
yeah,
was
so
that
that's why
only
I'm
in the video, or was that in the Paul W.S. Anderson movie only?
No, I'm pretty sure. Again, when we come to the minutia of the actual details of Resident Evil, I lost. Let's like look. I don't want to spoil things in case it's actually um, a thing. So it seems like Resident Evil 3 is a prequel to no, because then that would have been what happened in this movie at the same thing. Um, Interesting. I don't know, but I know people really love Resident Evil 4, um, which I think stars Leon. Yeah, um, Leon
Not the
sent.
actor Leon.
No,
Leon
no, no.
Kennedy.
Leon Kennedy. And this is how ridiculous it gets because I'm not spoiling future. I mean, okay, everyone. I'll give the movie a 3 out of 5. Uh, a soft pass because I mean, a pass. I enjoyed it. I weirdly enjoyed it. I don't think it's a great movie, but I think if you are a fan of the games, this is a movie that I will truly say is for the fans, not the critics. Where um, I really do think like if you're a fan of the Resident Evil games, there will be a lot of stuff in here. Even if you don't love the movie, you'll be like, oh, that's pretty cool. And I think there's enough to make it worth watching. So I give it a 3 out of 5.
I am going to give it a 2 out of 5, but that 2 out of 5 is a very high 2 out of 5, especially when considering it's the highest I have ever rated a Resident Evil movie. It is the best Resident Evil movie I've ever seen.
There you go. We got him. We got him. Okay. Spoilers for Resident Evil games if you don't want to listen to that, because I want to talk about it a little bit. Since it's our 300th episode, I'll let you guys leave if you don't want to hear. But so, Eric, Resident Evil 4, it takes place in a, here, I'll read the plot synopsis. Players control U.S. government special agent Leon S. Kennedy, who was sent on a mission to rescue the U.S. president's daughter, Ashley Graham, who has been kidnapped by a cult. In a rural part of Europe, Leon fights hordes of villagers infected by a mind-controlling parasite, and reunites with the spy Ada Wong, which who we saw at the end of this movie in the post-credit sequence with Sunglass Lover Albert
Wexler or Wesker,
Wesker.
Wexler.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Sunglasses.
yeah. And people really like that because it's like in a small town and it has kind of like a different a small European town, and it has this kind of different vibe than the first 3 games did.
Which will just be shot outside of Ontario.
It's yeah. Yeah, it's a village in Spain. But yeah, this, and she gets abducted by a cult, and then man, Resident Evil 5, which I think people don't like. Um Chris Redfield comes back there, and it takes place in Africa. Um so and then
Maybe problematic.
Resident Evil 6. No, 6 is the one people don't like. Do they like 5? This is where it gets so convoluted and ridiculous. Like I mentioned the US president, right?
Yeah. Which
And
actually almost sounds like a plot line out of like Escape from New York or Escape from LA. So
mhm, mhm. Sorry, I'm taking a drink. And then I just played Resident Evil 7, which was awesome and takes place in basically it's a new character named Ethan. He's terrible in the games though, like the voice actor and just the character. So unfortunately, you have to play it as this guy. But it's at a derelict plantation in Louisiana, and it's all these like hillbilly people, and like it's really weird but really really fun. But then this like weird plantation has all these puzzles and keys and stuff, and that's how ridiculous the games just are, because they're unabashedly video games, right? Like they don't care, like they try to make that stuff work in whatever world they've built, but there's no reason for there to be puzzles and secret walls and stuff in all of these places, but it's just kind of fun. So that's why I like that this movie just kind of sort of um you know wears that on its sleeve, even if it's not super great. Anyways, we'll see where the franchise goes. Who knows? Do you think they'll make another one, Eric?
I mean,
In
as
this,
long as it makes its money
all it
back.
needs to make is $30 million, right? Like
Yeah, which I
probably.
think it will. I mean, if they made 47 meters unhinged, the
Sure.
sequel, I mean, it should have been 48 meters down, but um, I think that there is a possibility there. I think what would be most interesting if this becomes a franchise, at what point do they maybe do like their own version of like a multiverse or something like that, where they try to bring back in Mila Jovovich? Even like I could see them
No.
doing that. They could though. I mean, that series is popular enough, especially internationally, where if it does well, which I think this could, if
The
it's
last movie made $312 million on a $40 million budget. So
yeah.
like
But
it,
look where it made that money, right? Like you got to see where it did well. Like it didn't maybe necessarily make that money in the US. It did really well, outside of North America. But yeah, I could honestly see like again, because if Paul Thomas Anderson, Paul W.S. Anderson, if he's still involved with it, I could see them doing that. And with like the whole multiverse thing being so hot right now, like I just have this weird feeling that they would probably want to bring her into it at some point. I don't know.
right. Fair. Anyways, thank you all. I hope you enjoyed this very special 300th episode of Untitled Movie Reviews. Here's to the next 300. Eric, predictions on what episode 400 will be. So
Resident
you
Evil
got to
2.
think. I hope so. I really hope so. Oh God, yes. Please go check out our other reviews we have up right now. We have reviews up for House of Gucci. We have reviews up for Encanto, Ghostbusters Afterlife. We reviewed a whole bunch the other day too. What else did we review? Um,
Well, we have Hawkeye, which
oh yeah,
yeah,
Hawkeye we just posted today.
yeah.
First 2 episodes of Hawkeye you guys can check out.
Tick Tick Boom.
Tick
Speaking
Tick
of Lin
Boom.
Manuel Miranda,
Yeah, King Richard, and much more. I mentioned the Ghostbusters Afterlife spoiler cast that's over on the Conversations channel, and we'll be back next week with the new Untitled Movie podcast. We're just taking this week off because we gave everyone the Ghostbusters spoiler cast. On YouTube, easiest way to find us is just Untitled Movie Podcast. On podcast services, just search for those 3 shows we just mentioned. The easiest spot, Untitled_movies over on Letterboxd. Everything's over there. Thank you all for listening or watching. As always, my name is Matt Rohrbeck. You can find more of my work around the internet, but mostly at UntitledMoviePodcast.com. And you can follow me on all the social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And I'm Eric Marchin. You can find more of my video reviews at rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
It's just a little crush, just like our fate every time we touch.